the founders read the Bible, and that's something that often gets lost.
They went to the original Hebrew, they divvied it up.
I'm walking into two buildings, one built around a book that shaped an entire civilization, and one determined to preserve every fragile trace of our nation's history. And I'm asking a simple question. What happens to a nation when it forgets the words that formed it? Washington, D.C. is known for its national treasures, places that preserve the documents of our nation's founding. But what about older treasures? The ones that go back thousands of years, the ones that help shape the ideas behind our laws and still influence the way we live today. I traveled to one of the best places in Washington, D.C., the Museum of the Bible, just a few blocks from Congress itself. There, I sat down with Anthony Schmidt, the Director of Collections, who oversees texts and artifacts that have shaped how people think, believe, and lived for generations.
This is one of my favorite places in Washington, and we'll talk about the museum, but tell us a little bit about your role here and the significance of what the museum offers to the American people.
We all work together to conserve and study the texts and the objects that we have in our collection, get them ready for exhibition, and work with external scholars to create research programs that shed light onto the history and impact of the Bible.
And this is a place that certainly is not passive for anyone who's not had the privilege of walking the halls. It's bustling with activity out in the hallways, and then also back in the back hallways, right, where the scholars like you are working.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of the core importance of this museum and why I was so excited, along with millions of Americans, in 2017 when it opened, because for too many generations in our country's history, recently, we have forgotten the importance of faith to our founding fathers.
You know, it's an important element of the story. The founders read the Bible, and that's something that often gets lost. And it was, for the founding generation, the Bible was a part of daily life. It functioned as a religious text, of course. You could hear it in churches and synagogues, but it was also a civic and political text as well. So. Yeah, it was quoted in the halls of power by some of the leading spokesmen of the generation. You know, it was in newspapers, it was in books, in almanacs, and it was influenced architecture, and so it was pretty ubiquitous in the founding era, and that created a deep familiarity with the content of the Bible and the language of it, and in a sense, it created a shared language amongst the different colonies that offered a point of unity. And so when it came time to discuss the ideas of liberty and individual rights, it was a natural resource from which they could draw. So you have some founders that drew heavily from the Bible, and others who were made passing references, but all of them were familiar with the content in some ways.
What do you make of the common devil's advocate argument that Jefferson, for example, had his own version of the Bible? The museum treats this really well. What's your response to fellow Americans who are trying to make sense of what they see as some sort of dichotomy there?
Yeah, the story of the Bible and the Revolution isn't one of a bunch of seculars trying to get rid of the Bible, and neither is it one of ultra people who are passionate and wanted to create some sort of theocratic society here in North America. It's much more complicated. The founders were fairly united in what they didn't like with the British.
That's a good way of putting it.
But in terms of the way that they saw the future and the role of government and what that government would look like, it was they were competing visions, and I think that reflected their own constituency. I mean, they were coming from different parts of what would become the United States, representing different groups and different interests, similar to today. And so there were a diverse range of views, and they came from different backgrounds, faith backgrounds and traditions that used the Bible differently. But the one common theme there is that they all knew its importance, and they knew the content, and it was a way of addressing important issues of the day, was drawing from Scripture and incorporating those motifs and allusions to make their points. So, people like Jefferson, another person could be like Tom Paine. But even Tom Paine references, Samuel in Common Sense. So, you have people who are very skeptical of the Bible's claims, but nevertheless using the Bible to make their arguments.
And I can't help but think that if Thomas Paine and or Jefferson were sitting with us here, they would be nodding pretty effusively, right? So, yes, this is, at the very least, the Bible is a very important touchstone. We've lost something in American society. We've lost that touchstone that I think even Jefferson and Paine would encourage us to keep. Explain what we've lost when we don't refer to the Bible, not just in religious settings, but in secular civic settings.
We lose an aspect of our history that was important to the founders and important for the subsequent generations. So founders, even like Thomas Jefferson, appealed to and referenced and understood, I guess, in his own mind, the importance of the Bible as a unifying force in society that could build up the type of morality that could sustain a republic. The founders were worried about a number of things, but two big questions. What's going to hold this together, and will this whole experiment fail? And so people like Jefferson, but on the other side, Boudinot, even Samuel Adams, John Jay, folks like this that. Of that nature that really appealed to the implications of the Bible as a civic text. And so to understand this type of history is to understand the founders in a much deeper and nuanced way than some flat interpretation of them that you find in some sources. So for me, if we remove that aspect of history, you're losing quite a bit of the depth and the understanding that you get when you see the full picture.
If the Bible really helped shape the language of America's founding, traces of that world should still exist somewhere, and I want to see them firsthand. For this, I headed to the Library of Congress, which has kept traces of the ancient world safe for years.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you.
So glad to have you here.
It's a pleasure.
We're in the Rosenwald Room, Rare Books Special Collections Division of the Library of Congress.
Dr. Kevin Butterfield, historian, fellow Kevin for that matter, Research Center Director here at the Library of Congress. I just have to say, from me, not even on behalf of the audience, what a treat it is to be here. Thanks for your time.
So happy to do it. Excited to show you things in this room and in this building.
Well, how about we take a step to these books behind us and go take a closer look.
Can't wait.
Now I see the story coming into focus through real objects that I can physically touch. A psalm book from the colonies, a pamphlet that helped ignite a revolution, a record of the arguments that shaped a republic. And in each of them, you can feel the texture of an American world still being formed, a world shaped by the Word of God.
These are special collections through and through. We're in the Rare Book and Special Collections Division, and there are items here, many of which have been accumulated across the 225, now 226 year history of the Library of Congress. One of them, by the way, we'll get to in a moment, is really the origins of the modern Library of Congress, which was Thomas Jefferson's gift, which expanded the library to include every conceivable subject. But there is a book here that came in the 1960s by a gift of an ordinary American citizen that is one of the most valuable books in the world, and it happens to be my favorite item in the collection. This is the Bay Psalm book. This is printed in 1640, the very first book printed in English North America.
It's remarkable.
There are 11 copies that survived. They printed 1,700 of them, but they were used to death because these were actually printed in order to be used in church services, sung. This book of Psalms, of these 11 copies, every time it's come up for auction, has become the most expensive book ever sold at auction. I won't talk about the value of any items here, but that fact is pretty remarkable.
The condition of this, given that it was printed in 1640, is remarkable.
It truly is, and it was a serious amount of work of the people of a newly settled colony, right? So Massachusetts Bay kicks off in 1630. By 1636 and 38, they're founding a college, they're setting up a press, and they had divided up the 150 Psalms among 30 ministers. Many you've heard of, like Richard Mather and John Cotton, John Eliot, Thomas Weld, and they created new translations. They took the original Hebrew, they worked hard to create faithful translations in English, They rhyme. Many of them are a little clumsy, but they were there to be used and sung. And this book of Psalms is something that is, to me, a great testament of how serious the very first settlers of North America were about creating a real society here, a place that was creating something new. They weren't just importing books from England. They were creating their own translations, printing them, and using them.
What a great example, sort of a classic example in American history of a single edition of a book
having just tremendous significance.
100%. And the Bay Psalm book, there are 10 copies that exist in the United States. One is at the Bodleian Library overseas, but there are 10 copies here, all distributed around. But this copy belongs to the American people, and we're really proud of it. I want to take you down to the founding of the nation. Here we have the sort of early settlement, but the founding of the nation really, I think, kicks off in January of 1776 with this pamphlet called Common Sense. Thomas Paine wrote this. He's only lived in America for a couple of years at this point. He writes a powerfully moving argument for independence. You know some of the lines. He calls the king the royal brute, and
some great rhetoric and common sense.
No, powerful rhetoric, and it was a sensation. This is a very first printing, but I'll actually let you take hold of a slightly later printing out of Lancaster. This is the original stab stitching from what would have been used later in 1776, and this gives you an indication of just how ephemeral these things really were. These things were there to be read, passed around, and in some cases, of course, bound and beautifully preserved, but in most cases not.
From the Bay Psalm book and Common Sense, the pattern is already visible. Faith, print, and public argument are not separate tracks in the American story. The next turn goes deeper into the Revolution and then into the constitutional settlement that followed it.
Just before that, Thomas Paine took another stab at writing for the American people. This is the American crisis. These are words perhaps even more powerful in terms of the rhetorical impact of just a handful of sentences than common sense. I think every American has heard these things, but I'll read a couple of sentences. These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will in this crisis shrink from the service of his country, but he that stands it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman. He published this about a week before the crossing of the Delaware. The story is that Washington had it read to his troops. It's very possible that they were just reading it themselves. But either way, this was setting a power and a moment that was culminating on December 25th.
This is part of our American DNA.
100%. And I think everyone is, these are the times that try men's souls. I mean, it entered the lexicon in a way that Paine would have been very happy about. As we head into the founding, across the war is concluded. There's the 1780s, I think people commonly call a critical period of American history. And it culminates in what Thomas Jefferson would later call one of the greatest statements of political theory, and the Federalist. So there are 85 essays that John Jay, Alexander Hamilton, and James Madison write to argue for the ratification of this newly written Constitution. What you're looking at here is Thomas Jefferson's copy of the Federalist.
Jefferson's copy of the Federalist.
Jefferson's copy came to the library when he came to our library in 1815 after the British burned the Library of Congress while burning the Capitol in 1814. Thomas Jefferson sold to the Congress at whatever price they were willing to pay him 6,487 books, and this is one of them.
What's preserved here is not dead history. It's a living testament to who we are and what formed us. What's important is whether we still recognize it.
Tell us what it's like to be working here in Washington, D.C., of all places, at a place that's dedicated to the Bible.
It's been a wonderful ride, and we've been involved in a number of projects that range from working with the African American Museum and local churches to working with the Samaritan community that is, still survives in the Middle East today.
And maybe that's why places like this still matter. People don't walk in as empty observers. They bring their own memory, their own inheritance, their own questions. And sometimes, in seeing this story, they start to see themselves within it.
It reminds me, one of my more recent visits to the museum, this is several months ago, the president of Armenia was in town visiting our president, and he wanted to make a visit here. And for some reason, maybe because of his understanding, knowledge of heritage, I was asked to accompany him. So in addition to the real expert tour guides, I was able to be with him and his team. And what made me think about this is what you said about appealing to all peoples. And that part of the museum that has the Bible in most languages.
Yeah.
And when he saw the Bible in his language, I think he was in tears. And it speaks to the universality, not just for Americans, but obviously for every human being. And while there are a lot of really important museums in Washington, and I'm grateful for most of them, I'm really grateful for this one.
People react emotionally to the exhibits and the stories that we tell here, because people want to see themselves in the story. They want to see themselves in this history. And certainly if they come with a background in faith and they come loving the Bible, the topic that we talk about most often, they're going to be very surprised and very encouraged by some of the topics that we cover here. So whether it's an ancient mosaic like we have on the first floor, or to modern translations that are being produced today, there is something for everybody.
One of the things we try to do in this show, and certainly at Heritage, is give friends some sense of what they can do to participate. And I know as I ask you that question, the first thing on your list is going to be visit the Museum of the Bible, which I would endorse. What else would you encourage our fellow Americans, in particular in this year that we're celebrating America's 250th anniversary, to do to participate in what is clearly a revitalization of an understanding of the importance of the Bible, not just for us on a spiritual level, but also for us as the American people?
I think learn as much as possible about the founding generation, not just the founders that people read about in schools, but some of the stories that haven't been told, because there are plenty. Everyday people participated in the Revolution, and there's some really good history now that dives into the stories of people who were caught up in this struggle and made enormous sacrifices, and so that to me is very encouraging personally, to see how everyday people reacted to those situations and some of the things that they did. Another thing that I would encourage people to do is to get involved somehow, in some way, whatever, follow your passion. But the founders, in some ways, knew that the country and the business that they were going about setting up, doing to set up the country was an unfinished project. And there were a lot of questions unanswered. And I think that it's up to succeeding generations to work that out.
For the founders, this was never a finished project. It was an inheritance, a responsibility, and a test, which leaves the same question with us.
The evidence is clear. The Bible and Christianity were the basis of America's founding. But you might ask yourself, why, particularly as we conclude this episode? The bottom line is this: our founders wanted a Christian nation. They wanted an American people, generation after generation, that honored eternal truths. And that's in fact what we got. I hope you've enjoyed this episode as much as I have. Once again, I'm Kevin Roberts, and this is The Next Frontier.